mostly known for my work on developing free software. That's not what I'm here to speak about today. Here, I'm going to speak about a proposed law that threatens to make it nearly impossible for independent software developers to develop and release software, regardless of whether it's free or proprietary or merely software for private use, which is the usual case. I'm talking about the danger of patenting software ideas. Now, most people have been led to confuse patents and copyrights, which in fact are two completely different laws that have almost nothing in common. The widely used, confusing term, quote, intellectual property, unquote, encourages this confusion, and therefore we should reject that term completely. To help unconfuse the situation, let me give a bit of explanation about how patents and copyrights differ. In fact, they have almost nothing in common, but these are some of the main differences. A copyright covers a work of authorship. A patent covers an idea. The copyright applies to the details of the expression of the work. Nothing like that in the case of a patent. Copyrights come into existence automatically. Anything written is automatically copyrighted. Patents are issued by the patent office in response to an application. The application has a high fee, but much more expensive is paying the lawyers to draw up the application so that it will be accepted. There are a lot of rules that you have to know how to follow in order for the application to be accepted. Now, anything that's written will be copyrighted. There's no criterion for how good it has to be or any kind of quality at all. But supposedly, patents are issued only on ideas that are new, useful, and unobvious. However, practically speaking, the way this criterion is interpreted, it means unobvious to someone with an IQ of 80. And finally, copyrights cover copying. If you spend a year in a cave incommunicado and you come out having written a novel that's identical to a novel someone else wrote and published during that year, you can prove then that you didn't copy it, and that's a defense against any accusation of copyright infringement. But a patent is an absolute monopoly on the use of an idea. Even if you can prove that you had the idea yourself, that would be irrelevant. You're still not allowed to use it. Copyrights last an incredibly long time. In some cases today, they can last 150 years. Patents last a shorter time, 20 years. But in the software field, 20 years is very long. 20 years ago, there was no World Wide Web. The Internet was just being started. And the IBM PC was a fairly new toy. And I think the Macintosh had just been released. If we were limited in developing software to combining the ideas that were known 20 years ago, there wouldn't be much of practical use today that we could do. I refer to these patents as software idea patents to help avoid a common confusion. Many people think this is an issue about, quote, patenting programs, unquote, but it isn't. Nobody is trying to patent specific programs. That isn't allowed, but nobody would bother even if it were allowed. A patent covering one specific program would not really matter to anyone. The reason why these patents create an issue is that they are not about specific programs. They're much more general. Each of these patents covers an idea that you might use in implementing various different programs that lots of different programmers might use, might put into the programs that they are writing. And that's what makes them obstacles and dangers to software development activity. The Economist once compared the patent system to, quote, a time-consuming lottery, unquote. And if you've ever seen publicity for lotteries, I'm sure you're aware that they focus a lot of attention on the unlikely possibility that you'll win, and don't mention the overwhelmingly likely possibility that you'll lose. So without exactly lying, they endeavor to give you a distorted picture of what's likely to happen to you. And it should be no surprise that the publicity for the patent system does the same thing. Most of the time, when people talk about how the patent system works, they have a vested interest in that system. Either they work for the patent office, or they are patent lawyers, or they might be patent holders or work for patent holders. So they tend to describe the system from the point of view of somebody who's hoping to take advantage of it. They tell you what it's like to walk down the street with a patent in your pocket, and every so often you can pull it out and point it at somebody and say, "Give me your money." To make up for that imbalance, I'm going to describe the patent system from the other side. I'm going to talk about what it's like to be one of the possible victims of the patent system, somebody who wants to develop or use software. What it's like to be walking down the street knowing that sometime, at any time, somebody could pull out a patent, point it at you, and say, "Give me your money." Suppose that you live in a country that allows software idea patents, and you want to try to work thoughtfully with the patent system and deal with the legal restrictions placed on your use of computers. What are you going to do? Well, the first step is to find all the patents that may restrict what you could put in the software you're about to develop. This is impossible, because there are patent applications being considered now which are secret, and you can't find out about them. But tomorrow or next year they may be issued, and they may restrict and they may then prohibit the program that you're developing. And this is not just a theoretical possibility. I've seen it happen. In 1984, the Compress program was released, a program for data compression. It used the LZW, data compression algorithm, which the author had seen in a journal article. This is back when we thought the purpose of the journals in computer science was to publish methods that we could use in our software. And at the time, in 1984, there was no patent on LZW. But in 1985, the U.S. Patent Office issued a patent. The patent holder was clever and did not immediately start trying to scare people. They waited a few years, figuring, let's let people dig their holes deeper. And then they started threatening people. So by around 1990 or so, we in the GNU project were looking for some other way to compress data. So we posted on the net asking who can help us. And somebody responded saying he had been working on a data compression program for a year and decided to give it to us. A couple of months later, when we were about a week away from releasing it, I saw the New York Times on the day of the week of the weekly patents column. And this didn't happen very often, maybe a few times a year. And it said that somebody had got a patent for, quote, a new method of compressing data, unquote. I thought we better look at this. And sure enough, it covered the program that we were about to release. Twice in a row. Well, eventually someone else provided the algorithm used in the program called gzip. And so everyone stopped using the other data compression programs and switched to gzip. So this particular story has a happy ending, but it's not as happy as you might think. I'll explain later. So you can't find out about the patents that may prohibit your work tomorrow or a year from now. But you can find all the issued patents, because those are published by the Patent Office. So those are part of the public record. You can get them. You can't read them all because there are too many. It would be hopeless. Keeping track of new software idea patents is a full-time job. So what you're going to have to do is search to try to find the ones that are directly relevant to restricting the kind of program you're about to develop. And this is not entirely reliable. There used to be a software idea patent in the US covering the technique, the feature of natural order recalculation in spreadsheets. Now, what does this feature mean? It means that every time you recalculate, it waits to recalculate any cell until the cells it depends on have already been done. So one pass through, it goes in the right order to make everything consistent. The earliest spreadsheets didn't do that. They ran in very small computers, kind of computer that existed more than 20 years ago. So they would always do it top to bottom, whether that was right or not. So you might have to type recalculate, 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 recalculate a few times to make everything get consistent. Then when computers got bigger, people figured, let's have it do the right thing for you. So there was a patent covering this, and somebody asked me for a copy. So I sent it to him, and he got back to me saying, I think you sent me the wrong patent. This is something about compilers. So I looked in the records again, saw that patent number, pulled it up, and yeah, its title said a method for compiling formulas into object code. So I looked at it again and saw, yes, it was the right patent. This was the patent that covered natural order recalculation. It actually covered the algorithm known in computer science as topological sort, whose first reference in the literature was in 1963. But this patent did not mention the term spreadsheet, did not mention the term natural order recalculation, and did not mention the term topological sort. If you had been searching for patents because you wanted to write a spreadsheet, you wouldn't have found out about this one unless you heard from somebody who was getting sued. However, by various searching methods, you'll find a lot of patents that might restrict what you're about to write. So then what? Then you've got to figure out what they mean. That's really hard because patents are written in twisted legal language and the words don't mean what you think they mean. It's very hard to understand that. The Australian government in the 1980s commissioned a study on the effects of the patent system. And this study concluded that there was no reason whatsoever to believe patents did any good for Australia, and said that if it were not for international pressure, they would recommend simply abolishing the system. But since there was the international pressure, they recommended making patents last a shorter period of time, narrower in scope, and harder to get. And in particular, they said that patents were completely failing at one of their main goals, which was to cause useful disclosure of ideas, because they were so hard to read that engineers essentially never read them. And they quoted an engineer saying, I can't recognize my own inventions. And I've seen this too. A programmer named Paul Heckel developed a program and then got a couple of patents that related to that program. And then when he saw HyperCard released by Apple, it didn't look anything like his program, so he would never have dreamed that his patents might apply to it. But his lawyer said that the way the patents were written, they could arguably cover aspects of HyperCard. So Heckel threatened Apple, and then when that didn't get him results, he started threatening some of Apple's customers, because the users also can get sued. And eventually he settled somehow with Apple and got some amount of money that neither of them will tell us about. This sort of thing is a little bit like child abuse in that people don't like to talk about it. The victims are scared to talk. So, once I was giving this speech in California, and Heckel was in the audience, and he jumped up and said, "That's not true. I just didn't know the scope of my protection." And I said, "Yes, that's what I said." If I had said no, he probably would have had some way to argue with me, but he sat back down and didn't open his mouth again. They love to use that propaganda word, protection, as if somehow an idea would get destroyed or become unusable if more people were allowed to use it. Reject that propaganda word. Never allow it. Never accept it. There's a lot of propaganda going on in this field. I may point out to you some other propaganda words. We've got to be vigilant against letting them into our own conversation, letting them warp our thinking. Another propaganda phrase is intellectual property, which I already partly explained. You know, trying to treat copyright and patents as if they were one issue, whereas when software idea patents endanger software developers and copyrights don't, is completely idiotic. Their effects are so different in practical terms that it is completely self-defeating to treat them as if they were a single issue. And in general, anyone who talks about intellectual property is either trying to mislead you or misled himself. More often the latter. To attempt to think about, quote, the issue of intellectual property, unquote, ensures that only foolish alternatives will suggest themselves to you as natural. It's a bit like trying to discuss the question of fluids policy. You know, fluids policy would clearly cover air, water, milk, blood, oil, and various other things, mercury. They're all fluids. We should obviously have just one policy. There's just one issue there, right? So, you're going to have to spend a lot of time talking with a lawyer, explaining what it is you're planning on doing, so that the lawyer can explain to you what the patents prohibit and what they don't. And eventually the lawyer will give you an answer like this. If you do something in this area, you'll most likely lose a lawsuit. If you do something in this area, you've got a considerable chance of losing. And if you really want to be safe, stay out of this area. But be aware that there's a substantial element of chance in the outcome of any lawsuit. So now that you know just what kind of business you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, how are you going to deal with these patents? For each patent, there are essentially three options you can try. One is to avoid the patent. Second is to get a license for the patent. And the third is to overturn it, show it's invalid. And each of these options, based on independent factors, may or may not be possible in any one case. So first I'll talk about the option of avoiding the patent. That means don't use the idea. So for instance, if you were making a spreadsheet and you wanted to avoid the natural order recalculation patent, that means don't put natural order recalculation in your spreadsheet. Would have been a rather lousy spreadsheet. People wouldn't use it. Now, when another example of a patented feature was a feature for word processors, a feature of defining an abbreviation. So you could take any letters you want and define that as an abbreviation, and then say what it should stand for. And then when you type that abbreviation followed by punctuation, it would automatically replace itself by the expansion. So you could define CMT as committee, and then you could type CMT space, and it would turn into committee space, or CMT comma, and it would turn into committee comma. Anyway, the word processor Xywrite had this feature, and then they discovered somebody in the 80s had patented it. So they tried negotiating with him to get a license, but they found out that he was just impossible to negotiate with. And then they thought about trying to sue to overturn it in court, but they decided that was too hard, too expensive. So eventually they just took it out, and they sent all the users a downgrade in the mail, taking out that feature. Now, how did I find out about this? Well, they wrote to me because it turns out that my text editor, Emacs, the thing that I first became known for, had exactly that feature in the 1970s. So they thought that I might be able to provide them with evidence to help them overturn the patent. So they had an argument to make, they just decided it was too troublesome a way to go, even despite having the evidence in hand. So it's nice to know I've had at least one patentable idea in my life. So they decided to avoid this patent. And it wasn't too hard, I guess. Not having that abbreviation feature would have been somewhat annoying to the users, but maybe they would still have considered the program usable. But you know, if you look at your word processor, you'll see hundreds of features. And they're all used by people, even though you don't use all of them yourself. When you start taking out one feature after another, eventually you end up with a program that the users say, this is just not good enough. It doesn't do what I want. Sometimes what's patented is an algorithm. For instance, the LZW data compression algorithm is a good example. We avoided that patent in data compression. We developed another data compression program which uses a different algorithm. So the people who thought, I want to compress my file, they used our program. So we solved that problem. But the same algorithm is used in the PostScript language. The PostScript language specifies there's an operator to do LZW compression and an operator to do LZW uncompression. Well, we can find another algorithm, but it's useless. No other algorithm produces compatible results. We could come up with another way to do data compression, but we can't implement PostScript, not as it's specified. Well, it turns out that wasn't too much of a disaster. Only the compression is patented, not the uncompression. And people don't usually ask their printers to compress anything. They only ask their printers to uncompress. So we sort of squeaked by, just barely, on that one. But then the same algorithm is used in GIF files. And the patent holder, Unisys, started threatening not just software developers, but companies that had websites with GIF files on them, saying, can you prove all your GIF files were made with a properly licensed program? If not, we can sue you. Of course, people didn't take too long to develop a replacement format called PING, or Ping's Not GIF, which uses the gzip compression algorithm, which, by the way, does better data compression, makes smaller files than LZW. And we started saying to people, stop using GIF formats, switch to PING format. And what happened? Not much. The users said, we can't use PING format. The browsers don't display that. And the browser developers said, well, we could implement PING format, but no users are asking for that. What you see is the difficulty of avoiding something that's a de facto standard. GIF is a de facto standard. When a de facto standard is patented, you're in real trouble. It's not just de facto standards that get patented, because JPEG, which is an official standard released by a standards committee, is also perhaps covered by a U.S. software idea patent, and people are getting sued right now. The standards committee says they don't think the patent really covers the standard, but nothing guarantees that the court will agree. Who knows what will happen? GIF is actually covered by 2 patents, both covering the LZW data compression algorithm that was patented twice. Now, that's not supposed to happen, but it does. And the reason it happens is the 2 patents are not written in the same way. You have to look at them and think about them carefully to see that they're both covering the same computation. Now, if they were patents on some kind of chemical process, you could say, you could have a quick way to see if you need to think about them. Because you could ask yourself, are the same chemicals going in? Are the same chemicals coming out? If they're the same, I guess I better compare these. But there's nothing like that to help you comparing these 2 patents on different ways of describing the same mathematics. The fact is, you could describe the same mathematics in ways that don't look exactly the same at first sight. Only when you think about them do you see it's the same mathematics. And the patent office doesn't have time. I'm not going to say that some patent examiner did this because he was stupid. The fact is they have only 17 hours per patent application, and they don't have time to take this application and every other application and spend a lot of time comparing them. This isn't the only data compression algorithm that's been patented twice. Remember that program that was killed off a week before we released it? That algorithm got patented twice too. But 1 or 2 patents covering a de facto standard is actually a light version of the problem. Look at the MPEG-2 video standard. That's covered by 39 different U.S. software idea patents at once. The negotiations to arrange some way that someone could license all those patents took longer than the development of the standard itself. And people from the committee that produced the JPEG standard were trying to work on a new version, but they say that software idea patents make prospective standardization essentially impossible. So sometimes you'll be able to avoid patents. Sometimes a standard means it doesn't matter. Even if you find a better way to do the job, it's still useless because it's not the standard. And sometimes there's a patent so broad that avoiding it is hopeless. The entire field of public key encryption was off limits in the U.S. because of a very broad patent until 1997. We just couldn't do it. Most people couldn't do it. So that's the option of trying to avoid the patent. The next option is to try to get a license to use the idea. Now that's not necessarily possible. The patent holder doesn't have to offer you a license. The patent holder can say, I will allow no competitors, I'm shutting you down. And that does happen. I once got a letter from somebody whose family business was making casino games using computers. And he was being threatened by a competitor that had a patent. And the patent, and the competitor wouldn't offer him a license. Just said, you've got to stop. You've got to close your business. Well, I looked at this patent. Claim 1 said, a network containing more than one computer, where each computer implements more than one different game, and each computer can show more than one game session at a time. That's all. I'm sure that there were various computer labs back in the 1980s in universities where they set up a network of workstations that had Windows systems and installed more than one multiplayer game. And if so, they were doing exactly what that patent described. And they probably didn't even realize that there was an idea there. And this is one interesting point. the idea that a software idea patent prohibits you from using might be something that you did without even conscious awareness of it as such. But anyway, the patent office tends to think that if somebody else did something once, or did one thing, and this other guy does it multiple times, or does several different things, that's an invention. But actually, in computer science, it's a basic principle that any time you've done something once, you could do it 10 times. That if you have one thing, you can have a choice between n different things. And if you do things, you can do them in parallel. Anyway, although this patent was utterly absurd, we couldn't help him. He had no money to consider going to court, so he just had to shut down. However, most patent holders will offer you the chance to get a patent license, but they charge a lot of money for it. For instance, the patent holder of the natural order recapitulation patent was asking for 5% of the gross sales of every spreadsheet in the U.S. Now, maybe you could afford to sign one patent license like that. But what really happens but suppose that then another patent holder comes and another and another. What happens when the 20th patent holder asks you for 5%? And then another one comes along. Well, this is really just a joke, because people in business told me that 2 or 3 such licenses would be enough to drag your business into failure. However, there are some software developers for whom it's easy and usually easy and painless to get a patent license. And those are the global megacorporations, because they have lots of patents, and they use those to force everybody else to cross-license with them. IBM wrote an article in Think magazine, issue number 5, 1990, about IBM's patent portfolio. It said that IBM got 2 kinds of benefit from its 9,000 active U.S. patents. Benefit 1 was collecting money. Benefit 2 was getting access to the patents of others through cross-licensing. And the article said that the value of benefit 2 was perhaps an order of magnitude greater, in other words, 10 times as big as benefit 1. Now, this is interesting, because, you see, the patent system is like a time-consuming lottery. If you're a small business, what happens to you from the patent system is, to a large extent, affected by randomness. But IBM is so big that IBM can measure the average for us. IBM can measure how big the benefits are and how big the harm is. And IBM's conclusion, stated in this article, was the harm is 10 times as big as the benefit. Now, you might think that that's impossible. That's like saying all the children are above average, right? It's a zero-sum thing. How could the harm on the average exceed the benefit? Well, the answer is that harm doesn't really happen to IBM, because IBM practices cross-licensing and avoids it. So there's this big harm and a certain amount of good, but IBM makes the harm go away, so all it gets is the good. But IBM measured for us the size of the harm that didn't happen. And that measurement is useful, because while IBM has 9,000 patents and they can make everybody cross-license, if you've got a small business, you aren't going to get 9,000 patents, and you aren't going to be able to make most people cross-license with you. Now, many companies say, we've got to get some patents to defend ourselves with. Well, the problem is each patent points in a particular direction. It's like a landmine buried in a certain spot. You know, if I've got a patent pointing there and there, and somebody over there points a patent at me, my patents don't do me any good at all. IBM, with its 9,000 US patents, it has patents pointing everywhere. So no matter where somebody is, if he attacks IBM, IBM can almost certainly threaten to shoot back and say, let's sign a cross-license so that neither of us gets hurt. Now, interestingly, these many companies that say to their employees, get us some patents, we've got to have something to defend ourselves with. While they like to say it's for defense, they don't offer to sign a contract with the employees committing themselves to use these patents only for defense. So a few years later, when the company's been bought out or has new management, and they got this patent pointing over there, well, they might just decide to use it opportunistically for aggression, and nothing can stop them then. Now, this practice of cross-licensing is very important to understand, because this is why the mega corporations want software idea patents, because they know that they will cross-license with each other and they will form an exclusive club, and the rest of us will be down at the bottom of a cliff wondering how we're ever going to get up there. It gives them a measure of dominance over everything, and that's why they want it. It's also important to recognize that this reveals the falsehood in one common myth about the patent system, the myth of the starving genius. This myth starts with a scenario which is implausible in a number of ways, unlikely. It says, imagine that there's a brilliant developer of whatever who's been working for years to come up with a better way to do whatever. And now it's working, so he's going to start a business. And because his idea is so good, his business is going to be tremendous. It's going to be a great success, except for just one thing, which is that the big companies will come and compete with him and take all the customers away, and then his business will fail and he'll starve. Well, this scenario is implausible at every step. First of all, in high-tech fields, people don't usually have ideas in isolation. Once in a while, yes, but usually they have ideas because they're working in the field with other people and working on solving real problems. The next thing is that if this person is going to start a business, well, it's probably going to fail anyway, no matter what, because over 90% of new businesses fail in a few years in the U.S., and the reason is that if he's a brilliant scientist or inventor, that doesn't mean he knows how to run a business, for one. He probably doesn't, so it's probably going to fail. But supposing he does know how to run a business, well, in that case, he's going to be smart enough, since he's starting a small business, to start it to go in a direction where the advantages of small businesses could be helpful, instead of trying to do the kinds of things that large companies can most easily do. The next point is that even if the large companies compete with him, that doesn't mean he has to fail. Not if he knows how to run a business. Not all small businesses fail. And finally, since he probably is going to fail, he probably doesn't know how. That doesn't mean he's going to starve. If he's that smart, he can probably get a job. So this is an unlikely scenario. If this ever happens, it's rare, and it isn't of great social importance what would happen. Given that he's not going to die, and given that, there are a bunch of other unemployed people, so it's just one part of a larger social problem we've got to solve. It would make no sense to decide patent policy based on this rare case. But let's look at it anyway. Here's what they say. They say that patents would make all the difference because this genius can get a patent. And then when IBM tries to compete with him, he can say, IBM, you can't compete with me because I've got this patent, so go away. And according to this myth, the patent will, quote, protect him, unquote. But here's what really happens. IBM says, oh, you've got a patent. And this one, and this one, and this one, and this one that cover various parts of this complicated thing that you're making. And if you think you can go to court and fight us on all these, we'll dig out some more. So why don't you sign a cross-license agreement with us? And then neither of us will get hurt. And this genius then recognizes he has to sign this cross-license agreement, and then neither of them sues each other. But what does that mean? IBM has got access to the patents of others. IBM can compete with him after all. The patent didn't, quote, protect, unquote, the starving genius. So if IBM was going to wipe him out by competing with him, it can still do so. The idea that patents, quote, protect, unquote, small businesses from big competitors is false. It's a myth. Now, even IBM can't make every patent holder cross-license, because IBM has patents on various ways of making things. But the lawyers, you see, although patent lawyers want us to believe that patents are really wonderful, in their own lives they have understood perfectly well that that's not so. So they've made sure that there are no patents on how to send a threatening letter to somebody, or how to file a lawsuit, or on how to win the support of a judge or jury. There are patents that belong to patent parasite companies, whose sole business is threatening to sue people and squeezing money out of them. And even IBM can't make them cross-license. But IBM figures that paying them off is just part of the cost of doing business, and that its competitors will have to pay them too. So they figure that they can just live with that certain level of parasitism. There are also certain software developers for whom getting a patent license is extremely hard. We free software developers. See, free software has been so successful because we've shown we can develop software without any money. Volunteers do it. We don't need to have money to develop powerful, large programs. But we certainly need to have money if we're going to buy patent licenses. The typical patent license requires a payment per copy, which means that someone like me can't possibly do it. Suppose the fee were 1/1,000,000th of a euro per copy. The total amount of money involved, I might have in my pocket right now, but I can't possibly fulfill that license because I can't count the copies. If it's free software, that means any of you can make more copies. If I put restrictions on you, if I force you to tell me, it wouldn't be free software anymore. Now, it is possible for a patent holder to offer a license for a lump sum, but when they do, it's usually a large amount, like $100,000. Often they want a lump sum and a fee per copy. We just won't be able to do that. So this is the alternative of getting a patent license. Sometimes possible, usually fairly easy if you're IBM or Microsoft or Nokia. Not very easy for smaller organizations to do without paying. The third possibility is to challenge the validity of the patent. Now, in order to do so, you need to have an argument to make, which means you need to present evidence that the idea was already known before a certain date. That means, in effect, the dice were rolled sometime years ago. And if you can find proof that they came out in your favor, you have an argument to go to court with, if you can afford the cost of this. A few years ago, Qualcomm was a defendant in the software idea patent lawsuit, and lost, and had to pay $13 million, of which $8 million went to pay the lawyers on both sides. So it's expensive. It can turn out that if you're not rich, and a probably invalid software idea patent is a very dangerous weapon to be attacked with. I should make it clear, not all software idea patents are absurdly trivial. I've mentioned a couple of those, but I don't think LZW is trivial. It's an algorithm. It wasn't obvious, but nonetheless, patenting it has done great harm. And public key encryption was a brilliant idea, but patenting it has done great harm. And abbreviations in a word processor, I wouldn't say that's brilliant, but I don't think it's trivial either. Patenting it has done nothing but harm. So these three options are possible. And each one is possible or not in any given case based on different causes, which means sometimes none of them is possible. And that means your project is dead. But in fact, people don't really usually try to look up the patents before they do something. And the reason is the penalties are worse if you knew about the patents. So it's better not to know. What people actually do is they close their eyes and they go. It's like crossing a minefield. At each step, probably nothing happens. But you've got a lot of steps to take if you're developing a substantial modern program. And that's an important point because, see, sometimes people used to ask me a rather silly question. They'd say, engineers in other fields have been dealing with patents for years. Why should software be an exception? Now, this is a silly question because it has foolish bias in it. You know, as if somehow living with patents were some kind of duty that we all had to expose ourselves to this danger. It's like saying, other people got heart attacks, why shouldn't you? Well, as I see it, each case of a person not getting a heart attack is for the best, all else being equal, independent of what happens to the other people. But there is an intelligent question we can find if we excavate under that silly question, and that is, are there relevant differences between fields that have implications for proper patent policy in these various fields? And there is one, namely, how big and complicated is each product? How do patents relate to products? And that's different from one field to another. We have in our minds a myth, a mythical picture of the patent system, which is that when you design something, there will be one and only one patent on that design, and you, the designer, will get it if it's a new design. Well, that may have been how it worked for mechanical devices in the 1800s. It's not that way now. But different fields are further or from that or closer to that. The field that's closest to that is pharmaceuticals. Until a few years ago, it really worked exactly that way. That the patents in pharmaceuticals would cover the entire chemical formula of a drug. So if you developed a new drug, there'd be no patent on it, and you, the developer, would be the only one who would get a patent covering that drug. I'm told this is not true anymore, but nowadays, if you develop a new drug, there may be an existing patent covering it. So it's moved away from this mythical picture, but it's still closer than any other field. And then there are the various other fields of physical engineering, and the other extreme is software. In software, we make things that are very big and complicated, that have lots of different features and lots of different methods going on inside, which means that in one program, we're combining lots of different ideas that might be patented already by various different patent holders at the same time. Now, why is this? This is no accident. This is not just a historical outcome. There's a fundamental reason for this. The reason is that in software, we're making designs out of combinations by putting together idealized mathematical components. In all the other people have to deal with the perversity of matter because they're making physical things. And the matter does what it does, and if it isn't what you expected, tough luck. So they have to deal with lots of problems, which we in software just don't ever face. For instance, if I put an if statement inside of a while loop, I don't have to worry about whether the voltage drop through the while loop will be so much that the if statement won't get enough voltage and won't work. I don't have to worry that as the while loop goes around, the if statement will shake eventually. Or I don't have to worry that it will go around even faster and this if statement will generate radio frequency noise and induce wrong values elsewhere in the program. I don't have to worry that corrosive fluids will get in between the if statement and the while statement that eat away at the contact between them. Eventually, there'll be so much voltage drop that the if statement won't work anymore. I don't have to worry that the if statement will burn out. I don't have to worry about how I'm going to sink the heat dissipated by the operation of this if statement. I don't have to worry about how, if the if statement does crack or burn out or corrode or whatever, how I'm going to remove it and put in a replacement if statement. In fact, I don't have to worry about how each time I build a copy of the program, how I'm going to put the if statement inside the while statement in that copy. When you design a physical product, often really the job is designing a factory that's going to make it. But we don't have that issue with software. If I want to make copies of the program, I type CP. Or maybe I type DD. You know, there's some copy command, and it'll copy any program exactly the same. See, there's so many problems that we just don't have to deal with because our components aren't physical things. They're mathematical ideals, and they have definitions, not just models. So they do exactly what they're supposed to do. So what does this mean? I presume that the intelligence spectrum of people in the software field is the same as the intelligence spectrum of mechanical or electrical or chemical engineers. But their fields are harder. Our field is easier. So what do? We push to the limit. People push all their skills to the limit. If you make your job big enough, eventually it gets hard. And that's what we've done. We develop programs that are very, very big, bigger than other things people can design when you measure in terms of how many components there are. A program with 1 million different parts in its design would be a program with 200,000 or 300,000 lines of code, I guess, because each line has several components typically put together. And this is something a few people can do in a few years. This is normal. This is not among the biggest programs. A physical design with 1 million different parts, and I mean not repeating subunits, many of them, but 1 million different parts in its design, counting repetitions only once, that is a mega project. That's at the limit of human ability. So what does this mean? In software, we can combine more different ideas in one program than people can do in any other field. And that means the patent system causes up more gridlock, more of the landmine effect in our field than in any other field. And the result is that software patents obstruct the main work of software development. The main work of software progress is not getting ideas. People who are working on programs are going to have ideas. And they'll just immediately implement these ideas. You know, you think, oh, I could make this nice feature in my word processor, so you do it. You don't need to do any research, you just have to write code. And so, having people working on software produces ideas for what you can do in software. Well, we also have universities where lots of people are actually getting paid, often with government funding, to come up with ideas. To have an artificial system intended to promote people's having more ideas by obstructing software development is self-defeating. It's going to result in fewer ideas, not more. Software patents are an obstacle even to progress in software. Now, this might seem unthinkable. The advocates of software idea patents ask you to take for granted that no matter what harm or trouble or nuisance these patents may cause, they must be promoting progress, and surely that justifies whatever trouble they impose on you. But this is not so. You can look at the economic modeling to show it's not so in www.researchoninnovation.org/patents.pdf. I warn you, it's rather mathematical, but it shows how, in a field with incremental innovation, a patent system can retard progress. The assumption that they want us to take for granted is false. And clearly, incremental innovation is normal in the software field. The same site has another paper showing that, in fact, in the US, empirically speaking, after software idea patents were allowed, the result was a decrease in investment in software R&D because the money was transferred into patenting instead. But there's an even more important reason to reject software idea patents, because patents in other fields are industrial regulations on a few specialized businesses. You know, patents on automobile engine design, how many companies do those restrict? You need to have a lot of money to set up an automobile company. But software idea patents restrict everybody with a computer. That's a large fraction of the citizens in a modern wealthy country. And so you can't judge these by the same criteria. To talk about industrial regulation, that's just an economic issue. But when you're restricting what the citizens can do on their own computers, that's not just an economic issue anymore. That's an issue of people's rights. Among those users, in addition to the citizens, you also find businesses. A large fraction of businesses use computers these days, and software idea patents will tie up all those businesses in a new form of bureaucracy, which is just going to make trouble for them. Now, I'm not a neoliberal. I'm not against regulating businesses when it serves the public good. But tying businesses up in a bureaucracy that benefits nobody except the mega corporations and some parasites, that's not a good reason to do it. So I call your attention to the big poster out there showing many common things that you have in an e-commerce website, which are already patented by patents issued by the European Patent Office. See, the European Patent Office was set up by a treaty which says that software ideas are not allowed to be patented. The European Patent Office basically gave the finger to this treaty and to the governments of Europe, and has issued over 30,000, I'm told, software idea patents. But whether these patents have any validity is questionable, because if somebody tried to sue somebody else with one of these patents, the court might say, this patent is no good. The treaty says these things are not patentable. So now we're trying to retroactively legitimate these patents through the current EU directive. Now, this EU directive's main intent, we think, is to authorize software idea patents. But it's not just a directive about software idea patents. It's a broader directive about patents. It covers patents on ideas that relate in some way to the use of a computer for something. It also includes other kinds of things, such as setting up a factory where a process is carried out and a computer decides how much of this to do or when and so on. Now, those are not controversial. nobody is actually arguing that those things should not be patentable. But the same directive would also legitimize patenting software ideas. And I actually don't have the quotation. I wonder if someone else would be able to read it. Someone from the European Commission admitted that the language of the directive is designed to look like, it's designed to make it possible for them to give you the impression it's not authorizing software idea patents, while in fact authorizing them. It says that patents must have a technical effect. And what that means is anybody's guess. So they can reinterpret that as they like later. Causing the screen to be red instead of blue, because the program displays the color red and not the color blue. That's a technical effect if they say it is. So the directive was designed to sneakily authorize software idea patents. A large amount of opposition has been generated, starting with the free software community, but going far beyond it. Developers of proprietary software have joined in, including well-known companies. Developers of software for use within organizations are objecting. The users are objecting. There's a European organization of 2 million small and medium enterprises that has voted to oppose software idea patents. The economists have helped by showing that these patents backfire even in their own terms. And of course, there are people in politics who believe that we should all have the right to do any legitimate thing with our own computers. So together, we convinced the European Parliament to conclusively reject software idea patents. The Parliament in September adopted many different amendments, correcting every part of that directive to exclude software idea patents, but allow the other patents, the patents on the industrial process where there's some computers helping to carry it out, where there's some specific physical activity, which is the subject of the patent, and is not merely the display of or calculation of something. And just recently, in a preliminary vote, the Council of Ministers reversed most of the amendments that the Parliament made. Some strange things happened in that vote, and we're hoping that maybe some of the countries will change their minds when this vote requires confirmation in a few weeks. But if that doesn't happen, we're going to go to the European Parliament again. They voted to reject software idea patents once. Maybe they will do it again. But there's about to be an election for the European Parliament, so it won't be the same people. Nonetheless, there were people in most of the parties voting against software idea patents. What we've got to do is confront the candidates from all the parties, and at the same time put them in contact with the people in their own party who have thought about this issue and rejected software idea patents. People that they can learn from why this issue is important and what's really at stake here. Most of them are not programmers. Most of them have never written a program. That's not their field. And they're vulnerable to being misled by arguments that any programmer would see through instantly. For instance, the U.S. is #1 utilizing computers, and the U.S. has software idea patents. That must be why, right? Well, the U.S. was in the lead in utilizing computers before it had software idea patents. So that's clearly not the reason why. And then they say, the laws have to be harmonized. If there's a difference between U.S. law and European law, then that would be impossible to live with. Well, why don't they go to the U.S. and ask the U.S. government to change its foolish laws? If you have gang warfare and if the U.S. has gang warfare and drug dealers, do you want in your country too, just for harmonization. And they say if the U.S. allows software idea patents and Europe does not, then American companies will have an advantage. This is really playing on people's ignorance because it's just the opposite. The U.S. has its own patent system which regulates everything that's done in the U.S. And the European countries have their patent systems that regulate what happens in those countries. But anyone in the world can go to the U.S. Patent Office or to the European Patent Office and apply for a patent. So right now, Europeans can apply for U.S. software idea patents and have got them, and can then attack us poor Americans at home. For instance, people developing MP3 encoders were attacked by with a software patent that happens to belong to a European. That didn't help us, we poor Americans. We can be attacked and kicked around by anybody in the world because our government has a foolish policy. But if the European Union rejects software idea patents, then European software developers will be safe at home, and European software users will be safe, period. So it's just the opposite. As long as the European Union rejects software idea patents, it has an advantage. But you know that when things are messed up in the U.S. government doesn't try to make them better. Instead, it tries to mess up the rest of the world too. And that's exactly what's happening here. The U.S. government is basically a flunky for the mega corporations and is trying to serve their interests by lobbying for software idea patents in other countries. And in many cases has signed bilateral trade agreements imposing software idea patents on other countries. However, the EU is too big to be bullied that way. So it's going to be up to you to make sure that software idea patents don't threaten every software developer and every computer user in the EU. Now, I think there are going to be some other people speaking now. I'd like to mention that for those of you who happen to be supporters of the GNU project, I've got some stickers to give out when people are done. And I've got a few little fundraising items like key rings and pins to sell. But this is not an event about free software in GNU, so I'll just do that at the end for those who are interested. And now hand the floor over to other people.
I have a couple of questions. I asked some of them to a patent lawyer a couple of months ago, and I have very vague answers, so I hope more clear answer from you. One question, I work with software and I work with stuff that sometimes I wonder could be patented, and if I should think of that.
I'm having trouble hearing you. Please try to pronounce every consonant clearly so I can recognize your words.
Yeah, sorry.
I am hard of hearing. Make an effort, please.
I will try my best. So, how do you work with patents in different countries? So,
it's simple. Each country has its own patent office and issues its own patents with its own criteria. Yeah. And these patents then restrict everything done in that country.
Yes, okay, I have an idea about that. So if I make a piece of software and I put it on the internet, and for example, my software is not patentable in Europe, but then it's covered by some US patent, shall I be worried? Shall I put that?
Probably not, because they might try to sue you in the US, but you can probably just thumb your nose at them. That is, even if they win in the US, they probably can't enforce it on you to collect any money if you don't have assets there.
Okay.
But if this happens, you really should ask a lawyer what to do.
If I have one time, by the way. Second point is, isn't the problem more general about patents and implementations rather than implementation?
No. Sorry, that's not what I think. I think the problem is patenting software ideas. Because to write a program, you've got to combine lots of ideas. And And you can't do that if the ideas are not available to be used and combined.
No, I was making the opposite point. So shouldn't the program be about not patenting ideas in general, not only in software?
I don't agree. Every patent covers an idea. Every patent says, here's a certain idea which you're not allowed to use. Whatever it says in the patent, that's an idea. An idea is any product of thought. Anything you can think is an idea. Now, there are people in connection with the patent system who use the word, quote, idea, quote, in a strange way, trying to make a distinction. They like to claim that it's impossible to patent an idea, only something else. But they're using the word idea in a peculiar way. Whatever is patented, it is an idea. And they're also wrong. They're trying to claim that only a specific implementation of something can be patented, but that's not true in any field. But the thing is, if patents were really very specific, they would be irrelevant in the software field. The reason they matter is precisely because somebody else might get a patent that covers the program you're going to write. That's why he wants that patent. If it were so narrow it wouldn't cover your program, he wouldn't gain anything by having that patent.
Thanks.
If he only wanted to cover the code he wrote, he doesn't need a patent. He has a copyright covering the code that he wrote.
Thank you for taking my question. It is, there is an organization in the United States called the Public Patent Foundation. Can you offer your opinion on that organization and its work?
Well, that organization is attempting to cause re-examination of certain patents. Now, if this succeeds in getting rid of some harmful patents, that would be good, but I don't think they can get rid of all of them that way. So it's like, somebody going around with a mine detector removing occasional mines. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not going to make it safe to walk around.
Sorry, just follow on to that. I do believe that possibly their work might heighten the awareness of the problems with patents and
it may. On the other hand, there's a danger that people will think, oh, well, they'll get rid of some of the invalid patents and then the system will work. Well, I think we should get rid of all the bad software patents, which means all the software idea patents. Because they're all bad because they all restrict how you can use your computer. Some of them may be legally invalid if the law were carefully applied, while others may be legally valid if the law is carefully applied. But they all are harmful, so I call them all bad. Unfortunately, only the ones that would be invalid can be eliminated, perhaps, by this method. Also, there are of re-examination. It leads to a procedure that goes on between the patent office and the patent holder. And the patent holder may get the chance to rewrite the patent so that it avoids the prior art that has been shown, but still covers what a lot of people want to do. You see, the way it works is you come up with prior art, which is essentially is proof that people used an idea that falls within the scope of the patent before the application is made. And then the question is, how far away does something have to be from this point that you can show was published before in order for there still to be a patent on it? And so that becomes a question of what is the threshold that the patent system uses. And in fact, their threshold is very low. The result is that the points of prior art that you can show are sort of like, American soldiers in Vietnam or Iraq. They control the ground they stand on, and that's all. So you may be able to prove that this particular idea was known 15 years ago, but they can still draw the patent to go around it and cover the things people want to do today.
Hi. I want to hear programming language. Is it language? So actually, theoretically, we could say when we program, we express ourselves. By software patents, I would say actually we limit free speech. Would you agree on that?
I would agree, but I don't think that legal argument would convince courts by itself to reject, to rule against software patents. Not once you have EU directives overriding constitutions. And if there's an EU directive that authorizes software patents, I'm afraid that this kind of argument about human rights won't get anywhere.
That would actually fit in the US also.
I really don't think so. I mean, maybe someone will someday get a chance to try it. I'm not a lawyer. The questions of what a court might or might not think, I'm not really that interested in. I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm trying to talk about what's a wise, sound policy and what's a foolish policy. As a programmer for more than 30 years, I think I can say something about that. But you should ask a lawyer what courts are likely to believe or not.
Different question about this. Anyway, I think one of the most famous patents is on the progress bar.
Well, that's one example of a European Patent Office software idea patent, yeah.
I'm just curious, is there any way of circumventing that? For example,
I haven't seen the text of that patent, so I have no idea. You know, the only way you could tell how many other different things are covered by that same patent is to talk with a lawyer looking at the text of that patent.
so if instead of having a progress bar, you have a little picture drawing itself,
I have no way of knowing.
there's no way to know.
There's no aid. We can't tell from what we know. If you get that patent and look at it with a patent lawyer, maybe you can figure it out.
And therein lies the problem.
Well, that's part of the problem. But you know, I wouldn't say that that's the whole problem. Not at all. Just the fact that you're not allowed to use a progress bar of the standard everyday sort is a problem.
I have a question about actually in patents. So can when I was published, be then patented if it's published in a journal, or does it have to be in the patent process beforehand?
It depends on the country, but in general in Europe, once the idea has been published, then any subsequent patent application is considered invalid. That doesn't mean the patent office knows that you published it, so they might accept the patent application for a patent. At that point, given proof that you published it, that it's, 10 years later, there's got to be a copy of the publication that you can use to prove it really was published. That could be evidence you could take into court to prove that the patent is invalid, if you've got the money to go to court.
I just want to sort of get your opinion on, you seem to focus on software patents as this has been a clear demarcation. There will be many cases that you couldn't draw that line. Many patents were drawn against physical systems that then can be applied to a software version.
Well, they shouldn't be.
Well, classical version, which has since expired.
I can't hear you. What are you saying? It's really unfair for you to say things I can't hear. And then I'm supposed to respond to that.
They're the best kind of. A classical example would be the concept of semaphores and signals. They were patented for the railway. But
They were what?
the concept of semaphores and signals, they were a mechanical system that was patented in the railway era.
That has nothing to do with anything going on in a computer.
Well, the concept,
Patenting a mechanical system for moving up a bar to tell a train what to do, that patent wouldn't cover anything in a program. Because it's a patent on a mechanical device.
but it did cover the concept of flow of traffic, and semaphores And simply
You know, you're saying this, I don't know if it's true what that patent covered. I haven't seen it. Have you actually read that patent?
yes, I have. It's well and truly expired now, but it would have covered semaphores and signals in units to cover pipes.
Then I guess we have to say that those patents shouldn't be allowed either. I mean, allowing someone to patent building a signaling machine to display lights, to tell a train what to do, okay. I'm not an expert on how to run railways, but such a general patent that would cover what goes on in software would have to be rejected, or else we have to say that it doesn't apply to the software.
Well, the other example would be general business processes, which are being patented now.
Well, that's exactly part of the problem. That allowing software idea patents allows patenting of business methods, which is a stupid thing in itself.
That can be, but again, that's start being patented in one domain and cross over.
It doesn't. I don't know what you mean. I mean, business methods shouldn't be patentable in any domain. There's no sense in that.
I agree in that respect, but there are, again, there are fuzzy areas where...
There are fuzzy areas in everything. They're not an important problem. You know, courts are constantly dealing with fuzzy areas in every word of every law. That's what courts are for. And so basically when people want a policy to stretch all the way across, they make the idea that, you know, to draw any line between would be impossible. But that's what courts are for, is to interpret the lines that are drawn between different cases. Consider the fuzzy line between drunk and sober. There is no one natural right place to draw a line between drunk and sober. And this is not, you know, I can say this, you can see this is absolutely true. It's not just that we can't see the place to draw the line, we know there is none. But does that mean that laws can't distinguish between drunk and sober? Obviously not. It just means that there's going to have to be a line drawn somewhere, and it isn't going to be at one place which was the only right possible place. That's all right. We need a line between there somewhere. We don't want to treat drunk drivers and sober drivers alike, so we'll have a line somewhere, and courts will figure out exactly some place for it to go. And it won't be the only possible place. You know, if they had put the line a little bit this way or a little bit that way, it would have been okay too.
I would. Just one question. When talking to people who are involved in drawing up some of these documents, and I've put a case of, you know, software patents are bad, all this, and they say things like, we don't have a choice. The WIPO treaty demands that we implement software.
There is no WIPO treaty about this. WIPO is still thinking about a substantive patent law treaty. They're making it all up. They do this constantly. Some of them may claim that TRIPS, or TRIPES as I prefer to call it, is the Trade Restricting Impediments to Production, Education, and Science. Some people will claim that TRIPES requires software patents, but it doesn't. That they make all sorts of bizarre, completely unjustified claims, figuring that they hope they'll escape from the conversation without looking like they're mistaken on the spot. They say, I gave a speech on this topic last Friday in London, and messages were read out from somebody from the UK Labour Party and the Conservative Party. And they were trying to give the impression that the directive as the Commission wrote it doesn't authorize software idea patents. Well, it's not true. But they hope they can get away with the pretense. And of course, if the directive goes through, there'll be no hope of ever revising it, because to revise it, we need to get all three branches of the EU to work together. So, you know, to block it, we only need one, maybe, but to revise it, we need all three. So they figure if they get it across, there'll be nothing that we can do, and it won't matter if they're seen to have been saying utter nonsense.
Dave, we have to close now. You don't do you have any closing comments?
I'm sorry, I can't hear what you just said.
Do you have any closing comments? We have to hear the
Okay, well, no, I don't.
The website for ifso.ie, it should contain information for how to work on the software patents directive, and what we're doing, and information on how other people can also assist lobbying the European Parliament and the European Council. So if you want to help, you take a look at the website.
I have two websites to recommend also, I realize, about this issue. One is www.ffii.org. That's the site with the most information about the situation in Europe regarding software idea patents. And then there's another site which is very good for introducing people to the issue, and that is softwarepatents.co.uk.